Santa Anna's biggest issue, I think what caused the whole mess, Santa Anna's style was to take a smaller force, usually the best troops in the Mexican army, most of them were at San Jacinto. Urrea had a few of them, but most of them were at San Jacinto. And so he would take the best troops, he would storm out in front and surprise the enemy. That was his style. Well, he got a lot of criticism for breaking up the army so much. He had troops there. He had Filosola's troops here, Urrea's troops there. And here he gets caught way out in advance of the rest of the troops and gets caught off guard. The Texans captured a Mexican courier the day before, or 2 days, 1 or 2 days before the battle at San Jacinto, and they got all these documents that proved that Santa Anna was out there by himself with not that many troops. So that's when the Texans decided for sure to go ahead and attack. So Santa Anna's style, I think, having troops here, having them there, everything, instead of staying together as an army, was a big plus for the Texans. On the other hand, you could make the argument that if they'd had 6,000 Mexican soldiers and all those females in one place, they wouldn't have been able to feed them. They wouldn't have had enough water. It would have been bad if they had 6,000. It was bad enough when they got 1,000 together in one place. There weren't any stores. The food supply was terrible, and it took them forever to get supplies from Mexico. They didn't hardly get any supplies from Mexico. They were living off the land. So
here's a question I've been wanting to ask somebody who might be able to answer this one. Santa Anna's orders to execute all prisoners.
mhm.
I know that Urrea was against it, and there was a general who I believe was killed at Santa Anna, Cuyon or something like that.
Castrillon.
Castrillon.
Mhm.
How much of an effect were they stating only because the war was over that they were against the executions? Were they just trying to make themselves look good? How much of a factor was that in terms of the way the generals looked at Santa Anna?
It's interesting because Santa Anna, when he was coming into Texas, made Tornell write a declaration that all rebels captured under arms would be treated as pirates and executed. So Tornell wrote this declaration, and it got passed by the Mexican Congress. This was about December 30th of 1835. So this was the official government policy. And I think the Texans pretty much knew it. Okay, it got published in a newspaper from San Felipe. It was in the Mexican newspaper. So I think they pretty much knew that this was what the Mexicans' approach was. If we catch you as a rebel under arms, we will execute you. Of course, that was Santa Anna made sure that got passed. Santa Anna was trained by Arredondo at the Battle of Bonita in 1813 when the Spanish were putting down a revolt in Texas. And Arredondo was a very vicious, violent man. That's the way he was trained. And so Santa Anna was trained that way. It's interesting, though, Urrea, after the Battle of at Toledo, the Fannin battle, he immediately went to Victoria. He didn't stick around at all. He didn't even go back to Goliad. He took off, and he later claimed that he was vehemently against this, but he had executed some Texans already before this point. Said he didn't have any choice, and he claimed that he wrote Santa Anna. We have of all the documents we have, the only document we have of him writing Santa Anna, he was praising his troops about being generous in not killing the Texans, but he didn't say anything about please don't kill him or I'm against it or anything like that. He claimed later that he was vehemently against it, but I don't find it. I just don't find any record that he was vehemently against killing those troops. I think he just washed his hands of it. He didn't want to be involved, but he just said I had to follow the orders. And Portilla was the guy that had to carry out the execution there at Goliad. He was a colonel, and he wrote Urrea and said he just felt terrible about it, but he had to obey orders, and he did what he had to do. De la Pena, most of the Mexican officers, I think, thought that it was a bad thing to do, that they should not have done that. But the Texans all act like they surrendered under terms, but they didn't. And Urrea and one of the other, a German who was fighting for Urrea, they all, their testimony is that Urrea insisted that they surrender at discretion, which means if you surrender at discretion, they can do whatever they want to. And as you know, execution is certainly is one of the possibilities. So I'm convinced that the Texans did not surrender with terms. Urrea tricked them into thinking he wasn't going to execute them. And I think if he had a choice, he wouldn't have. But he said, I will do what I can, but I don't think he did anything. I don't think he did what he could. I think he just moved on and washed his hands of it. Now, to me, the big thing about the Goliad Massacre is that the Texans let, I want to say 15 or so of the Mexicans let about 15 of them escape, and they made it back to San Jacinto. And I think the Texans were furious when they heard, because the Texans, the guys that escaped, were led to believe by Fannin that they had surrendered at terms. I think Fannin told his men that they surrendered with terms. So then they surrendered with terms, and then the Mexicans executed them. They were furious that the Mexicans did that. I think that really whipped them up at the Battle of San Jacinto. If you read a lot of details about how bad that was, they killed women, they killed children. The Texans were not going to be held back. They threatened to kill their own officers if they tried to stop them from killing the Mexicans. So it was about as nasty after the battle was over at San Jacinto as the same as the Alamo. It was just the other side that was doing the bad stuff.
Yeah, I think I read a quote somewhere where a guy said, if Jesus Christ came down and told me not to kill a Santanista, I would have.
Yep.
I don't remember what the rest of the quote was, but he was like, yeah, screw you, Jesus.
Yeah.
But two things I want to mention real quick is that
You're going to say that right after Easter?
Oh, I didn't go to church, so.
Yeah, that's right.
So I should be okay.
Yeah. No, I don't think you will be.
It's funny. Okay, so you said that the Texans knew about the no quarter order. So I had read that there were some men in a boat somewhere or a ship, and when they saw the Mexican army, they threw their guns overboard. Was that so that they can say, "Hey, we weren't armed. We're just." Was that the reason?
I'm not aware of that particular incident, but it wouldn't surprise me. The one group that surrendered, and technically they were under arms, was Ward's men, not Ward's men, Miller. Now I can't remember, the Georgians that had just gotten off the boat at Copano. They were captured, and Santa Anna was mad about it, but they didn't ever get executed because technically they had never fought against the Mexicans. So a couple of the Mexican officers were able to pull that off, that there was about 100 guys that came from Georgia, and they just arrived there, and they were not executed. They were separated from Fannin's men. So there was some technical limits apparently.
So what was Philosilla's and Urrea's working relationship after, after the retreat through the Sea of Mud?
They didn't get along at all. Like I said, even during the retreat, they were almost never together. Urrea had gone in front to capture the Atascocito crossing. Then as soon as they got across, Philosilla sent him ahead to clear the road and to gather the troops and everything. So they were almost never together. So all of this was on paper. Urrea wrote scathing letters to the Secretary of War about how terrible it was that Philosilla retreated. They even had an inquisition when they got back to Mexico to see if they should court-martial Filosola. And they decided, no, he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't really have much choice. It wasn't like he had all these options to go back and attack the Texans again. But he was planning on waiting for orders from the Mexican government. But after the Sea of Mud, and the Mexican government told him don't retreat any further. But by then he was already way past where they told him to stop. And I think he realized it wasn't going to happen. They weren't not going to stop the retreating Mexican army.
If I understand correctly, there was a pause or an unnecessary pause before that rainstorm hit. Is that correct? By Filosola's army or Urea's army or both? That sort of got them caught?
What happened was just that they were so separated.